Hi everyone, this video lecture is going to cover an introduction to Norse mythology. We're going to go over some of the background of the myths as well as the gods, goddesses, and the 9 realms, and some of the important things that you want to know before you start reading the book. So we're going to start with some influences. Where do these myths come from? These myths are from, when we talk about Norse myths, we're talking about the Norse and Scandinavian peoples. This would be in the northern Germanic area, all the way up here through Sweden, Norway, Finland, Denmark. This entire area we have stories coming from. We're talking about the northernmost Germanic mythologies, but there are quite a few variations depending on where the myth comes from. So when we're talking about these myths, we're going to focus specifically on the versions in the textbook. What happened is these myths, of course, were around for a long time. There are quite a few influences that we'll discuss here in a minute, but Christianity came along in the Middle Ages and really kind of wiped them out. So you'll see some similarities between Christian stories and the ones that you'll read in the textbook, the Norse stories, because they sort of absorbed some of those traditions. There's a lot more tradition than religion in the stories as well, so you won't see a lot of how they practiced their religion, more so what their gods were like and how they maybe gave their life meaning and taught morals and that sort of thing. So we do have kind of a grand narrative going on with these stories. So a lot of the stories were influenced by folk tales, particularly Irish and Celtic folk tales that would have been pulled over and created into their stories. The Finnish stories of the Kalevala is an epic story, and a series of magic songs as well were part of this influence. We know about these stories specifically from the Icelandic poetic Edda, which is anonymously written, and then the prose Edda that was written by Snorri Sturluson in 1220. That's what our pretty much only written account of these stories. This was written in the Old Norse language, so if you can find a copy of the prose Edda translated, it would be pretty cool to read. Later on, we get, of course, Beowulf, which is the Anglo-Saxon tradition, and that's where you really start to see the influence of Christianity on these stories. So we're seeing, as it goes through time, we're seeing all these stories kind of be pulled together. The Vikings, of course, would have been heavily influenced by these myths. We have about 3 centuries of what we call the Vikings now, and they are the ones who really spread these stories. So when we look at, if you've ever watched the show Vikings and look at some of the Viking traditions, you'll see some of the similarities with some of the stories you'll be reading. So let's start with the pantheon. We've got the Norse gods, the Aesir, who are the warrior gods. We're just going to go over the gods first. Odin, of course, you guys are probably familiar with. He's the king of gods, also known as the Allfather. He's got quite a few different names, but in the book he's primarily called Odin. He's the father of some of the major gods, such as Thor, Tyr, and Balder. Thor, god of thunder. Also kind of the god of the people. He is spends a lot of time with humans, and so he tends to influence them quite a bit, but he is technically known as the god of thunder. Tyr is the god of justice. You may recognize his name as being part of the Fenrir story. A lot of students are familiar with that already. Heimdall, he's the warden of the Bifrost. If you've seen the Marvel movie, they got that right. He controls who can travel along the Rainbow Bridge. Loki is the god of fire, but he is also the trickster god, and he is sometimes good and sometimes evil. He sort of starts out as just being mischievous and annoying and ends up being truly evil by the end of the book. Balder is the god of beauty. He is sort of a Christ-like figure. He dies and then comes back later. The goddesses would be, again, the warrior goddesses, these living with the gods. Frigga is the goddess of marriage, fertility, and childbirth. She is the cohort of Odin. She's the wife, similar to Hera, but not nearly as jealous when Odin sleeps around. Iduna is the keeper of the golden apples of youth. She doesn't have a job otherwise, and just keeps the apples so the gods can stay young. She's not terribly bright either. Sif is the corn goddess, and she has beautiful yellow hair. She's also the wife of Thor. And Jord is the earth goddess. She's not going to feature in the book, but she is Thor's mother. So if you're wondering, Thor comes from Odin and the earth goddess Jord. Then we have the nature gods. These are the Vanir. They live in Vanaheim. And we have Njord, who's the god of wind and sea. Frey, his son, the god of the sun. And his twin sister Freya, who's the goddess of love and beauty. They're similar to Apollo and Artemis in that they're twins, but Freya is a lot more like Aphrodite. A couple other important figures, the Valkyries. You probably have heard of Valkyries before. They're warrior maidens. They work for Odin. They collect fallen heroes. You'll see a couple of Valkyries in the book. The Norns, similar to the Fates, they guard the Well of Weird. There are a couple of wells that are important in the story. Urda, Vardani, and Skuld represent the past, present, and future, typically depicted as an old woman, a middle-aged woman, and a young woman. And then Jormungand is the world snake. It circles Midgard, where we live. And Fenrir, the giant wolf. And then Hel, or Hela, spelled both ways, is the goddess of death. And they are the three children of Loki. So that brings us to the 9 realms. The 9 realms are the areas that the Norse recognized as being part of our universe. Depending on the version that you look at, Muspelheim is on top or Niflheim is on top. And so this is the order I want you to think of them in. Muspelheim being the realm of fire. Alfheim is the realm of the light elves. Asgard is the realm of the warrior gods. It's where we find Valhalla. They're where the fallen warriors go. Vanaheim is the realm of the Vanir, or the nature gods. Midgard is where we live, realm of humans, right in the middle. Jotunheim is the realm of the giants, and these would be the Jotuns, who are constantly at war with the gods. Svartalfheim is the realm of the dwarves, or dark elves. Hel is the realm of the dead. That's where Hela is. She gets to be named after her own realm. And then Niflheim is the realm of ice. So we got ice and fire. You can probably guess that Norse being surrounded by ice, and then volcanoes were a big part of their lives. So it would definitely have been a lot of ice and fire metaphors. Other important places, we have Yggdrasil, it would be the cosmic tree. The 9 realms are connected by the tree, and there's going to be quite a bit in the book that talks about the creatures that live in the tree and that kind of thing. The Bifrost is the rainbow bridge. It doesn't connect all of the realms, but it is a bridge over which the gods can pass to get to other realms. Valhalla, realm of the fallen warriors. That would be humans, typically, who die heroically in battle and are taken by the Valkyrie. And then Iduna's garden will feature in the book as well. Story of creation, the start. This is, in the book, it's like somewhere in the middle, and so it's helpful to kind of know where everything started. We start with Ginnungagap, which is basically nothing, similar to chaos in Greek myth. Then Muspelheim and Niflheim appear, so the two furthest realms from each other, ice and fire. They meld together and create the giant Ymir. And Ymir sort of starts to create, so he's sort of the primal cosmic being. He starts to create other giants. They are fed by the primal cow, which also appears, called Audhumla. And then There are some other giants who appear. Buri is licked out of the ice by the cow, and then becomes the grandfather to the first three gods, Odin and his two brothers, Vili and Vi, who don't get to do much in the stories. The three gods end up killing Ymir, so similar to the Greek, we have to kill off the previous ruling group. In this case, it's the giants against the gods. So then, of course, we have to create the next generation, which would be humans. Odin, Vili, and Vi, before they start creating a lot of the other gods, actually create humans. So they, walking along the beach, they see two trees. They create the woman, or the man, Ask, from an ash tree, and the woman, Embla, from an elm tree, and then they give them gifts. So similar to the Christian tradition, we have to have life breathed into us by Odin. Vili gives us thoughts and feelings, and Vi gives us sight and hearing. So that's how humans are actually created by the gods in this tradition. Our home, of course, humans' home is called Midgard. What the three gods do is they chop up Ymir's body and they create the universe with it. Midgard is actually protected by Ymir's eyebrows, which I think is kind of cool. So you'll learn a lot more about that story in the book, but that's just sort of an overview so you get a good idea of where we're coming from before you start reading. A couple of common themes I want you to keep in mind. These would be good to write in your notes and just keep close to you as you read through the book. Fate is unavoidable again, just like our Greek myths. We can't get out of our intended fate. If we're given a prophecy, that's what's going to happen. The big one in this set of stories is Ragnarok. Ragnarok is completely unavoidable. Wisdom always comes at a price, which means that you have to sacrifice if you want to gain knowledge. In this case, a big story, of course, will be Odin losing his eye for wisdom. Deception sets off negative consequences. This will be a big part of Loki's story. We start the very first chapter with some deception by the gods, and that will lead us all the way up through Ragnarok. Greed is the most destructive vice. You'll see a couple of gods sacrifice things that they shouldn't have because they are greedy. And then men and women actually share equally in the fall of the world. All of the gods and the goddesses will fight in Ragnarok, and they will all fail, of course, because that's what happens at the end of the world. But everyone is equal, which is a little bit different from some of the traditions. So this has just been an introduction to our gods and goddesses of the Norse realms. Definitely start reading the textbook. You'll learn a lot more, and then there'll be other things posted in the module to help you out.